But awesome. All right, so let's dive into it. So this is super exciting for all of you guys watching. We have TrueSpec Master Club Fitter Jason Owens from the TrueSpec facility at Pronghorn Resort in Bend, Oregon. For those of you that saw some of the content I posted leading up to this, I saw Jason a few months ago, and we did an iron fitting together, and this is why I wanted to have you on here, Jason. It absolutely blew me away. I've been in the industry my whole life. I've been a professional in the Class A PGA since 2012. I've been around club fitting for a very long time, but what you did and what you took me through just absolutely blew me away. It was above and beyond anything I've ever seen in the industry. And I think the system that you guys use and the level of precision that you have and the technology behind it and everything like that just makes so much sense. And I think it's going to clarify for a lot of people watching exactly what makes this process so unique. And we'll talk a little bit about TrueSpec and your guys' philosophy, but then just club fitting in general, and kind of give people some idea of how getting new clubs or fitting the clubs they have can help them with their game this season. But for those that don't know you, I'd love for you to just take a couple minutes and explain yourself and your background and get everybody excited.
Yeah, no, well, first off, thanks a lot, Blaine, for having me on this morning. This is pretty neat, but and I hopefully we can share a lot of good stuff with all the folks. But so I've been a golf pro for 23 years, 20 maybe 24 now, since right out of college, and mostly my career's been in Oregon. You know, and it gravitated towards teaching and club fitting early on in my career, and I've spent the last time I was at a private club in Portland, I spent 11 years as director of instruction at Waverly, and then randomly I just got connected with some folks at PXG, and I wasn't planning on leaving and getting out of instruction or anything like that. I was super happy. I loved what I did. I had a passion for it, but just long story short, it worked out that I took a master fitter position with PXG, and I covered Oregon, and I got Idaho, and I was traveling a lot, and I loved what I was doing, and my fitting skills were getting better and better, but I was leaving a little bit of the instruction. And so anyway, about a year ago, I got contacted. I randomly got lucky and got to move to Bend. It's if you've never been to Bend before, it's like greatest place on earth. But and then I get connected with TrueSpec, and I knew they were going to open a location at Pronghorn, and it just worked out after a few short months that I was able to get on board and join the team at TrueSpec, and it's been just shy of a year, and it's been awesome. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background.
Awesome. I love that. And I love what you said about Bend, because it is one of my favorite places anywhere in the country. I mean, as an outdoor enthusiast and as a golf pro, I mean, I'm trying to get down there as often as I possibly can. And it's a pretty good central location for anywhere in the Northwest. It's really not too unrealistic. Whether you're in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Boise, you can get to Bend. You can have a great weekend. You can play some amazing golf. Can you share a little bit about the other facilities? Because I know TrueSpec's not the only, or Bend isn't the only location.
Sure. Yeah, so we've got, I think we just opened January 2nd. I believe it's our 19th location in the country, which makes it, I think, 23 or 24 globally. And, you know, at our national sales meeting just about a month ago, we did open a bunch of facilities, you know, more than a handful of facilities in 2019. And the goal for 2020 is giving back to those locations that we've opened. So I think you're gonna see a little bit of slowing of how many new locations open. On the West Coast, obviously our headquarters is in Scottsdale, but we do have some brick and mortar locations, such the one like the one I have at Pronghorn, and we opened one at Shadow Ridge down in Palm Desert, and then we've got some mobile fitting, like it's a mobile cart that takes the entire matrix that you saw, Blaine, in my studio, and it puts it on kind of a razor, and they can drive it out onto the range, and so they go visit mobile accounts. And so we have 3 of those in the country, so it's pretty special and unique. And there's, you know, obviously they divide the country up and they try to go where the nice weather is. And so we have a lot of options to reach folks that can't make it to a standalone location, but it's exciting. So yeah, the newest location I think is going to open soon in Grand Naples in Florida. So that's going to be pretty exciting. hopefully that's not cat out of the bag right there, but we'll see.
I do think I saw something on social media. They pushed it out there, so I don't think you're spilling all the beans.
Yeah.
Now, for those that don't know the TrueSpec process and whether you can get to a TrueSpec or not, I really like what you guys do with your brand agnostic approach and really just finding the best fit for your game. And I know a lot of people watching, whether they can get to a TrueSpec or they're just going to their local pro, what is it somebody should be looking for in a fitting process to help their game this season?
Well, one of the coolest parts about TrueSpec is it's 100% performance and database driven. So obviously with technologies such as a TrackMan 4 or a Foresight GC Quad or any sort of measurement that you can use as a tool for fitting, you got to look at how that club is performing for that specific individual. And a lot of times, more often than not, we open the drawer, we're brand agnostic, so we literally carry every brand possible almost. People typically don't fit into what they think that they would play the best. And so it's eye-opening to see what really combination of head design, shaft, the weighting of it. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into what end result does perform the best. So our process, we bring someone in, depending on what type of fitting they're looking for, if it's a full bag or just irons and wedges or whatever they want. We take some measurements. There's a really good initial, the day before the appointment, they get a questionnaire, like a player survey and profile. So I get to log in the night before and look at their answers so I get to know the client. And then the next morning or the next day when I get to see them, we blueprint their current product in the category that we're fitting them for. So a blueprint means we just take a measurement of length, loft, lie, swing weight. We have a very good, one of the best frequency machines in the studio. So we know exactly, honestly, as you know, Blaine, you can't really pay attention to if the shaft says it's a stiff flex, because between different manufacturers, it fluctuates on who thinks what is stiff. And so anyway, we have an idea of what number is associated, like a frequency, to each club. And then we get to see how, and then here's the key, here's the end all be all, is how well built is that player's current set of clubs. And we use the word tolerance, okay, because if you're having a robot build it, it's probably going to be pretty accurate, but we have humans building a lot of stuff. And so we make some mistakes, or maybe it's not done all at the same time. And so there's some discrepancies in there. And so then, you really, honestly, if you're getting fit and you're investing any money in it, it's how quality and how tight of tolerance you can build that set of clubs to.
Now, you touch on a lot of really good things here, because one of the things that blew me away, if you remember this, when I came down, is I went through a fitting years ago. Yeah. And I was on staff with a certain company, and we don't need to name names or anything, but the manufacturer built me a set of clubs. And yet when I came to see you, you went through the blueprinting process, and there was such a wide range of variety where even though all the shafts were the same, if I remember right, my 6-iron was a double X stiff, my 8-iron was like a stiff plus, my 7-iron wasn't like they're all over the place, and there was fluctuation, which as a player made me feel better that I can just have, it's not me. And we saw that by the end when we got a good fit, the dispersion pattern was just so much better. So how can a player, when going through a fitting, because I think where we want to kind of, where the question's going is, what's the difference between a fitting and a build, and how can somebody make sure that when the clubs are built that it's what they got fit for?
So let's use it in terms of, like, if you were to go get fit, like you and I were going to go to a wedding, right? And we go get fit for a tux, okay? So let's say you have the absolute best person that can take the measurements, like arm length, shoulders, etc., right? And then they send those measurements over to their seamstress, and that seamstress maybe does an arm and maybe part of the side, and somebody else does the other arm, or maybe there's too many hands in the pot, or depending on how many checkpoints during the build at whatever manufacturer, what do they check? Such as if you pure a club, not a lot of manufacturers pure clubs. There's different things that they do, and keep in mind the manufacturers are building on a much bigger scale than like we are at TrueSpec. Like we don't have 50 to 100 builders. I mean, we have a handful, and they're amazing. I mean, so when you get fit for whatever, let's say it's in a frequency range of 260 on a driver at 45 inches, which is our standard length for a driver. Now, it might say stiff, it might say X, but we always frequency every shaft we have, so we know where it falls in that family. And then what happens is during, and if you remember, like at the end of the fitting, once we land on exactly what performs best, fits, I cover all the bases with you. I put in what's called a prescription, which is I'm actually creating the build sheet all the way down from every club itemized with loft, lie, swing weight, grip, size, type, frequency, everything. And obviously it's a grid, and it has to be built perfect. And so it's really unique because we're connected to the builders. So a lot of times I get a special notification. I wear an Apple Watch because I usually keep my phone off during an appointment, but my watch will buzz. And if it's a builder, he's stopped the process, because each client or each customer we have, their order, however big or small, is built by one builder, period. And it does get touched by 16 different points in QC, which is quality control. So not only is one guy seeing it, but 16 different times it's getting checked. So, which is unique. But so that builder, if he can't hit a certain frequency or swing weight, which is usually the two categories that are off because of length and certain head weights, or the characteristic, the profiles of shaft, then he will pause, and he will reach out to me, usually in email or text, and say, hey, Jay, I can't hit this. Here's what we can do. Do you have any suggestions? And so we work to get to a certain end result that's as close to perfect for that player as we can get. So it's pretty unique, you know. I mean, to be able to talk to the guy that's actually doing it, and you know, I mean, thank goodness, knock on wood, I don't usually get that many calls, because I'm pretty good at putting in the prescription. So, but it's pretty nice to have that backup, to know that, hey, everybody on our team has the same end goal here, to put the best built and perfectly fitted clubs in each customer's hands.
Absolutely. And, you know, back in December, I was traveling across the country, and I was in the Phoenix Scottsdale area. So I stopped by the headquarters there at TrueSpec and was given a tour of not just the fitting area, but the build area. And it blew me away, just how much amazing equipment there was, the team that was working, how clean and organized it was. I mean, there was a process for everything, and you could tell that the guys there were they love what they do. There's a culture around it, which is just so amazing. But one of the things that you touch on that I think people watching might be curious about, because I didn't know anything about it until we got together, was this idea of frequency. Yeah. And I'd love to hear your take on it, because at least from my perspective, not knowing any of the technical side of it, it seemed like once you found the right irons for me, it was kind of like you discovered my fingerprint, if you will, where that club was now just a part of me. It was an extension of me. And whatever I wanted to do with the club, high, fade, low, draw, anything in between, it was happening, and the tolerance was tight. But what does frequency mean? And what does that mean in comparison to like stiff and regular and senior flex? And is that the same, or are they different, or what does that look like?
Yeah. So frequency in a nutshell is when you frequency a club, ideally you would blow the grip off and stick the butt end of the grip or in the club in the clamp. So the clamp is perfectly tight to the shaft. Then you bounce it. Now, if you bounce it and it's a lower frequency, it means it's softer, and it kind of moves up and down like a really soft, the softest flex possible. And then if you put like your iron, like a 2X or whatever in there, and it bounces really quickly, right? Mm-hmm. That's going to have, and it's called CPMs, so cycles per minute. So there's a formula for it, and obviously the big frequency machine is much smarter than I am. So, but I know what the number is, and now it's connected to a chart, a universal frequency chart, and there's two for irons and woods. Well, it's really one, but it's based on length of club and then what the CPM number or frequency is, okay? And so every 10 CPMs is a flex. And so you can put in different requests. I want it you know, tip a shaft a half an inch, which is a half a flex. You know, you can try to make a shaft if it's at 260 CPMs at standard length on driver. If you want to make it play a little stiffer, I can put in a couple CPMs more, you know, or and keep it at that length. But as the club gets longer, the CPMs come down, and because of the length of the club. But so at the end of the day, you know, some companies, different shaft manufacturers, they have their own family of category of what flex is. So a lot of times, you know, I won't name specific shafts, but some shafts I know that come in X flex. Like, I mean, I swing a driver, I don't know, I'm probably a little quicker now, I'm a little stronger, but, and I choose to play an X flex, but it's really a softer X flex. And so, like in your irons, you know, a lot of like 2X was really stiff, you know, and so here's the thing. How does frequency match up with a player? So we look at speed, we look at the delivery of the club. Now we're really interested in how the ball's performing, okay? And the ball's an extension of what the club was doing at the moment and through impact interval, right? So if because you're a really good player, if you wanted to hit, and we did this in our fitting, a little high fade, we want to try and move a little draw. Most players aren't in your category of a good player. And so they want to hit this, they all want to hit this thing straight. And most people don't hit the ball high enough. And so what we're trying to do as a really good fitter is line up how that player is delivering the golf club, because there is some droop in the shaft, there's some lead deflection. And you know, there's a lot that's going on there. Now, could a player that swings an iron like tour average 92 mile per hour on a 6-iron, could they play a senior shaft? Probably. It's just at 92 miles an hour and the frequency is soft, it's just the shaft is bending and moving later, you know, and it might make it more difficult to line up what we're trying to do at the face and the path of the club and stuff. So that's where we get that dispersion. Like with you, by the end, we had that thing pretty tight. You felt like that club was an extension of what you were doing in your swing. And that's how we try to line up frequencies. You know, not everybody, you know, I mean, there's shafts in our drawers that are flex and are way stiff. They're stiffer than most other stiffs, you know, and so you just don't know until you really start testing. And some players have good feel, they can see it, and some don't, but I see it in the performance, in what the ball's doing, what the club's doing, and then it's a combination of what kind of head and the design of the head.
I like that. And as you're explaining that, my mind is also going, because I'm a musician, I play guitar, and I'm also thinking like the gauge of the string, the tension of the string. And it's like, if you have a guitar that's out of tune and the strings are all wrong, you can play a song. But can you play it to the full extent of your ability and have it be a flow and just come out sounding pretty? Well, probably not, unless you have an incredible amount of skill. Like Jimi Hendrix used to do it live because he'd play so hard his guitar would go out of tune, he could figure it out. But if we're not Jimi Hendrix, if we're not Tiger Woods, if we're not Rory McIlroy, we're going to struggle. And we might be playing the right scales and playing the right chords, but it doesn't sound good. But it sounds like if we get that tuning, if that fitting is correct for the way that we swing the club, it's just going to start to happen,
yeah.
Which I think is so cool. What about, I thought it was really unique. I was always under the impression that we do the shaft first and then the head. And yet when I came to see you, we flipped that over. We found the right head first and then optimized the shaft. And I think the biggest thing was when I went into the fitting, and for those of you guys watching, I have our whole session on video, I'll link to this, is I came in thinking there was a particular head I wanted to play. And we tested 9 heads, and I think it was something like 7th down on the bottom in terms of how it performed for me. So I had this preconceived notion of this is what I want to play, and yet it wasn't doing anywhere near what some of the winners were doing. And granted, if you guys watch that video, what fit me is not necessarily going to fit you. And I think that's where the brand agnostic comes in. But I'd love to hear more of why you took that approach and what we were talking about with the numbers and why we went that route.
Yeah. So another interesting fact that we do here at TrueSpec is we do our own independent testing every year, and we do it over in Korea. And we lease out a big space, takes a couple weeks. and one of our key exec VPs, senior vice president, Tim Breon, does it. And he's one of the smartest guys I know. And throughout all that testing, the head design is more, it moves the needle more than a shaft flex range or gram weight or anything. The head is about 65% more important than the shaft choice. So I fast forwarded so with you. So when we do the fitting and I do the preliminary testing with your current product, I might have you hit a handful of shots. I might toss out like the really poor non-measurable ones, but I do want to keep like some B- shots in there and just see some misses. But then when we actually start, I skipped it because I knew at your club head speed, shaft family, whether you're going to play a steel or you're going to play graphite. So shaft family. So you might get a player that's like, I don't know, 68 mile per hour or 72. And then I'm looking at some of these other windows or categories that I want to hit, like that I need, maybe more peak height, maybe more spin, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe that player, I'm on the fence. So I can't identify shaft family because I might put him in a little heavier graphite or I might put him in a lighter steel. I don't know yet. But with you, super fast club head speed, not likely you were going to play a graphite in your irons, you know. So I went to steel, and then we immediately selected heads because I knew according to how you swung that club and some of the dynamics of the club at impact, the speed, some of the things you and I discussed that we wanted to achieve, because we want to set some, we want to set some, I would say, goals. And towards the end of the session, I need to be able to say, hey, look, we wanted more peak height, or we wanted a tighter dispersion, because you, in your case, carry distance and how far you hit this ball isn't your primary category because you already hit the ball really far. So some players come to me and say, I don't need to hit a 7 or 6 iron, 190 yards. I just want to hit it higher or straighter or whatever. So once you do that, then it kind of lines up, you know. And then once we start testing, I mean, so I pull a lot of heads, you know. Some fitters might pull less because it might, if the player's really into out and they don't want any offset on there, in our drawer with, you know, 100 different 6-iron heads, maybe we don't pull some with offset, but I try to pull as many because I think what I think might work best, I'm not sure yet, and I try to test it. But you know, you're only hitting few balls, 2 or 3, 4 balls with each head, and we eliminate those pretty quickly.
Awesome. And I think that's such a great point, is how you're saying you work together as a team, because through this process, if you remember, the head that we ended up finding that worked the best wasn't even an original choice. We pulled out, I think, 8 heads out of the drawer. We tested them all, and then based on all that data, you looked at everything. You're like, I think I got this. And you went back to the drawer and you pulled out another head, and it was right on. It was, all the numbers were perfect. I think I picked up like 8 yards, my dispersion down to this tiny little circle. I could work it. And then we went into that shaft fitting, which I thought was so cool. So what I want to do here, because I'm sure there's a couple of people watching. For those that are, I want to open this up to a Q&A. If anybody has a question, just type it in the comments section. But we also have some questions that came in from people who couldn't make it today. And I think outside of just the TrueSpec world, just club fitting in general, people are really curious about what to look for and how to make sure that they're spending their money the right way and getting the best product for themselves. So let's start with this first one came in. This one is from Jerry Palumbo. Jerry wants to know more about the acceptable tolerances. They're a very strong part of TrueSpec's philosophy and marketing. Are we talking about tolerances related to loft, lie angle, swing weight, shaft flex, length, grip size, etc., or are there other variables that we haven't talked about? And are there acceptable tolerances? Are they just as important to, say, a higher handicap or a scratch player, or are they universal across the board?
So if you look at how a club's built, you know, like the length of the club. So when a customer comes in and I do a blueprint, the length of the club is very rarely off, meaning, you know, obviously between like a 5, 6, 7, 8, usually there's like a 1/2 inch increments. And very rarely do you find an issue with the length of the club. Now, depending on how old the golf club is or the type of material the head is, such as how soft of a metal, the loft and lie cannot be so tight of tolerance. You know, you can, I mean, sometimes it goes from, you know, it should be a half a degree between irons, and sometimes it jumps 1.5, or it's something's odd. And then I kind of, maybe just their 7-iron was weird, and I say, hey, Blaine, and they say, oh gosh, you know, I had that reshafted, or I lost it and I ordered another. So then there's a missed one in there. But so tolerances, you know, let's talk about shaft for a second, because that's really important, because the heads, you know, we are a customer of each of the manufacturers. So we get heads from a ton of manufacturers. So when we do the build, we're ordering hundreds and thousands of shafts from a lot of different manufacturers. Now, when we get those shafts in a box raw, let's say there's 25 shafts to a box, we independently test frequency-wise raw, undone on anything, 20% of those. And if they're not within a super tight window of frequency, then we box it back up and ship it back, because we want to use only the best products, and the products that we know fit in a certain window. And so that's where the tolerances are. Now, head weight, how you achieve a certain swing weight, you know, because the heads, if let's say it's 260 grams, I mean, the heads weigh what they are from the manufacturer, you know, and then depending on what we do with gram weight of shaft, the length of shaft, grip size and stuff, we can try to achieve a certain swing weight. So there's a little tolerance issue there. So you just have to pay attention to like a dry run. When our builders are putting everything together before they're assembling, they're dry testing everything, even the amount of epoxy and stuff, and how much they're using. And I mean, they dry test everything to make sure if I want a D3 to D4 swing weight on an iron set, that it's landing 3 point something or right on that number, you know. So it's extremely tight, and it's, you know, like it's incremental. It's itemized out. So
awesome. I love that. And I was fortunate you showed me the massive like Excel spreadsheet with hundreds, if not thousands, of lines of what you're talking about, because how you were explaining it to me is like, you could go in for a fitting and get fit for the right club, but then at the end of the fitting, you say, hey, I want to put a mid-sized grip on this. And now all of a sudden it's different. The grip's heavier, the swing weight's a little bit different, but it sounds like you guys have figured it out where if you put this grip on, it does this to the balance and the weight and the swing weight. So therefore you need to do this, so that you're talking apples to apples. And that just absolutely blew me away.
It's crazy, because even just the difference of like manufacturers of grips and how heavy each different grip is. And then you get into size, you know, and it throws things off, you know, and, but that's where you have to pay attention. And the unique thing for us, because we do dry weight everything, is I know exactly what every head weighs already. We know what the shaft weighs. We know how it frequency, when it's untrimmed, uncut, everything. We know how it can, at what length I want it to be at. And then really you have to put that combination in. And there's sometimes you know, that was joining the team at TrueSpec, getting head weight and swing weight synced up took a little bit, because I wasn't quite certain on what head weights were, you know, and stuff. I wasn't ideal on it. But after like the first mistake, I was like, okay, this is what we're doing here. So it's good.
Awesome. I love that. And while we're talking about that real quick, and I want to go back into questions, but speaking of mistakes, you had mentioned something to me where, at least at TrueSpec, if the build is not right or anything like that, you guys have some kind of guarantee?
Yeah,
right?
so we have 100% performance guarantee for the first 30 days. So let's say you order a set of irons, and the day that you receive the box and you open them up, your 30-day clock starts. And I try to tell people, because you're going to get some touch points from me and from headquarters, like right after you receive the clubs, 10 days after, et cetera, just checking in, just making sure everything's good. But I try to tell people, play as much as you want, hit as many balls as you want for about 3 weeks. And then if you shoot me a message and you say, hey, I love these, they're perfect, then great. But if you're not seeing how they perform, because everybody at the end of their session with me, I will fire the entire TrackMan report to them, so we know exactly how a certain club played and performed in a fitting. And if you get them and it's not performing that way, then we have a performance guarantee. So then I usually bring back that customer back in, throw them back on TrackMan, just see what's happening. I'll do another blueprint of the club that TrueSpec built. And then if it's not performing the way it is, then we either refund the money 100% or we redo the build. Let's say something randomly came up, which I haven't had that happen yet. One example, one gal I fit, super nice gal, started her iron set at 6 iron, so no 5 iron, no 4 iron. In the session, she hit the iron with me on a pretty good peak height. She didn't hit the window that was ideal or optimal, but she was in the category of low launch, low ball flight gal. When she got it, the peak height was even much lower. So then I took back just the 6 iron, because the 7 iron she hit super well. So it was just something about a 6 iron in her mind, and we instead popped her into a hybrid, and she achieved what we wanted. So we took back a 6 iron but rebuilt our hybrid. So we like to know that, like, kind of like your primary care physician or your real estate agent or something, like, we want you to stay in the family with TrueSpec. So whatever changes that people want to make to their bag, or if they make changes in their game with their coach and instructor, does that affect the performance of the club? It can, for sure. So we want them to come back in and get checked, just to make sure that things are lining up, and they're achieving the right things with ball flight. So
I love that. Speaking of ball flight, this next question comes in from Buck Mayers, and he wants to know more about the effects of essentially gear effect, and how when you're not on the center of the club face, the path, the face, the gear effect, the ball flight, how does that all play into what the result is, and how do you find the technology out there to maximize your return on the strike?
Yeah, I mean, gear effect is, and we'll use like driver, for example. There's bulge and there's roll on the face. Like obviously a driver face isn't just flat. And so off center hits, I mean, let's say on like TrackMan, you're using the deep lane, you're using path, club face angle, and then angle of descent or ascent. Okay, so those 3 factors will go into the curvature of a ball, in addition to location of hit. Location of hit is super important. I mean, I've used the TrackMan in flights. I've used everything, even gears, which is a 3D motion capture. But when you look at those numbers and you look up and see that ball flight, and it's not doing what the numbers say it should, most commonly it's gear effect. It's meaning, is it high toe, low heel? Where are you hitting it on that face? Now, there's things that go into gear effect and impact location. Maybe we have the frequency of the shaft is too soft, it's drooping too much. A player that raises the handle a lot gets more droop. So there is some things you got to look at how a player's delivering the golf club. But impact location is huge, and that's why TrackMan, Foresight, GC Quad, Quad is exceptional, especially indoor. We run GC Quad at all of our indoor locations. And every club has some fiducial, some reflective markers on it, and shows exactly where you're hitting it on the face. Gears is ultimately the best, but that's 3D motion capture. But learning where you're hitting it on the face, and sometimes I've seen players playing, I can't get their mark off the toe. I mean, I worked with an extremely high-level collegiate player down at our Beverly Hills studio, and I know his instructor extremely well, and his instructor's amazing. But he was doing stuff with the handle and leaning. I mean, he's launching a driver. He swings at 116 miles an hour. He launches a driver at 8, and every new head out right now is low spinning. So he hit these low bullets all day, but they were all toed, and it didn't matter what I did with shaft. We went really stiff, shorter. I mean, I tried a million different things to see if I can move that mark, but I couldn't move it off the toe.
So to go into this next question here, we have one from Art. Art, I'm going to butcher your last name, Robidou. I apologize if that's wrong. But he had basically 2 questions in regards to understanding how you can find the right shaft. And the first one is, would one have to hit every shaft possible to be able to narrow it down to what the right shaft would be for that person? And then two, how can a fitting simulate what's the word I'm looking for? A fixed hosel versus what's the word I'm looking for? The screw on the
connector, like
yes, thank you. Oh my gosh, yes, thank you.
So the connectors, obviously, if a club's epoxied and it's a glued head, it's super tight, you know, and obviously extreme conditions. If you leave your clubs in a car and the epoxy heats up, or in extreme cold, etc., that's not good for your clubs. But when you get fit, and now with all these 6-iron heads, or some manufacturers in their fittings use 7-iron heads, or we're talking about woods. I mean, almost all the woods nowadays are all adjustable. But the connector is extremely good, almost, I would say, apples to apples to an epoxy club. You wouldn't notice a difference. But visibly, you know, obviously if you look down and you get fit with us at TrueSpec, you see the club connects component that connects the club. So it looks a little bit larger than like a pure hosel that's perfectly well done. So yeah, does that answer that question?
Yeah, so I guess that is that something that's just taken into consideration in that spreadsheet that you guys have as your connectors, your guys, well, I guess let me rephrase it. Are the connectors that you guys have slightly different weight than a manufacturer, and is that something you've already taken into consideration?
So we actually, so TrueSpec Golf is owned by, is under the umbrella of 8 AM Golf and Howard Milstein's the owner. And underneath that umbrella, you have Golf Magazine, golf.com, TrueSpec, and also Club Connects. So we bought Club Connects, which is the adapter and the connector. Now there's 3 pieces. So let's say you get a raw head from a manufacturer on a 6-iron and it's 260 grams. Well, the piece that goes on, the adapter piece that goes on the tip of the shaft, it has a weight to it. And then on there's one piece that has to connect on the hosel that we have to connect to the hosel. So then there's 2 pieces on the shaft. So there's a glued connected piece, and there's a screw that's loose that you have to connect the screw and then tighten. Well, all 3 of those pieces have a certain weight to them. And so we take a raw head at whatever that head weighs, 258 to 262 grams, whatever it is, and then we say, we know exactly dry weight, how much each Club Connects piece weighs, and then we have to adapt that club head to accommodate that weight. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So that if you're fitting a golf club, and I put this club in your hands, and I screw it together, and I attach it, and then I go swing weight it, and I do a fixed blueprint on that club that performs best, I know exactly how that club's built currently, and I know what the stuff weighs. I look in our testing sheet that we've done, and sometimes sometimes the head plays a little bit heavier than what it would, barely. I haven't seen the tolerance is still very tight. But you have to know how much each Club Connects piece weighs, and then what the heads weigh. I mean, you have to know it, otherwise you're putting like an E2 swing weight into someone's hands, and it's like a sledgehammer, right? So, yeah. And then I think on that question, that gentleman had a question on shaft, right?
Yeah, so does that just have to do with finding the frequency? Yeah,
so I mean, ultimately, if you look at how fast they're moving this golf club, okay, that gives you an idea. You're trying to throw a dart. Obviously, the center mark is ideal, perfect, right? I'm not going to just pull a random shaft that's going to hit the outer ring of that dartboard. I'm trying to chip away to get to the ideal one. Now, because I've done this for so long and I've taught the game for so long, I've seen every kind of level of player. I get an idea, meaning I know how fast you move the club. I don't share a lot of the swing technique data with someone, but I guarantee you I'm staring at that a lot as a fitter, because you know, I look at how they're technique-wise and what their skill level is, and then I look at what are we trying to achieve. If it's a higher peak height, maybe we need more spin, or maybe we need less spin. Then I can utilize shaft to help do that. You know, like, I mean, stiffening up a shaft, if for a right-handed player, commonly we would see a little lower ball flight, maybe a little further like pushy, you know, because the shaft's not deflecting and helping the ball move more left, you know? So at the end of the day, I'm trying to maneuver with the shaft choice how to layer onto the optimal ball flight and dispersion and then hit those categories. Because at the end, I still need to be able to say, hey, Blaine, look at that. 8 more yards carry, way tighter dispersion, higher peak height. Look at where you're hitting it on the face. I mean, this is really good here, you know?
Awesome. I love that. David Wang wants to know about the torque of a shaft and if temperature affects the playability of a club, winter versus summer, and how that affects in the performance of it.
So I'll start with the temperature. Obviously, it's, I don't know, I worked out really early this morning. It was 28 degrees when I went out there. But so just think about it in terms of like the ball. I think the cutoff is around 55 degrees, and most golf balls decline in performance. Now with shaft, I think that it can, I don't know like what the actual statistics would read, but it makes sense to me if the ball is constructed in certain ways with different types of core things of how it's built. And at a certain temperature, it's not performing. It makes sense to me, like some graphite shafts or things on how the shaft is bending and how it's moving. When it's colder and more rigid, it makes sense that to some degree, it will perform a little bit differently. I don't know how much, you know, and I think without actually testing that, like playing, you know, if you fly to Hawaii and it's 85 or 90 degrees, it's perfect weather, sea level. Go somewhere where it's also sea level, but it's 10 degrees, you know, and see if your ball's doing similar things. But then obviously the ball's not going to perform as well, so because it's colder. So it's just, it's hard to nail down. Now to the torque of a club. So for most of you that don't know what torque is, it's not the bending of a shaft. It doesn't have anything to do with frequency of it. It has to do with the twisting of the head. Now, as a player applies force on that shaft at certain speeds, the club and the weight of the club, okay, because the weight is mostly down at the head. And so there's all those little things that add into what the torque of the club is doing. So just raw, uncut shaft manufacturers can put out, I mean, you can go to any of their websites and they'll say what the torque of that club is. It's 1.2 or 3.2 or whatever it is. You know, and listen, as you know, Blaine, a lot of people, from my experience, players will look at me and say, I'll ask them questions. Talk to me how that feels maybe at impact, or can you feel that? And some people say, I don't know. I can't feel anything. And then some players go, the minute I hand them the club, they're like, ooh, I feel something really different. And I'm scratching my head because we didn't change the shaft or the length or anything like that. We changed the head. And I have my chart pulled up, and I'm like, okay, the head's way the same. So this is odd, you know, like, but I don't tell them that because it's a feel for them and they identify with it. So, but it does go into the differences of how that club is torquing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Ken Lowen, and I think this is a very common question, to sum it up, is basically getting fit for the perfect swing versus the swing you have.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I've worked with literally someone that's never touched a golf club before, but wants to learn how to play, and they need a set of clubs. But then I've worked with tour players. So at the end of the day, the higher or worse the skill level gets, even though it's not a very good technique, they usually have a pattern. And so patterns in the game, you can fit a club to a pattern, but if you really take it quite a bit further and get to know your client and what their intentions and goals are for their game, are they interested? Are they the kind of player that's going to take some instruction and coaching? That sun's right there. I'll move over a little bit. So then, once you find out from that player, you know, what they're doing, you kind of want to lead with that fitting. So, I mean, if a player's coming 9 degrees across it, the toes 8 degrees down, I'm not going to build a club 8 degrees up, you know, like, and so there's certain things and variables in there that go into that. Now, as a player changes their golf swing, they do need to, I worked with a guy and I saw him, I fit him, he bought full bag, and he's an amazing guy, but he worked, I think he took like 3 lessons a week. And I watched him, and he was in the fitting, he was about 4 to 5 degrees across it. Mm-hmm. And he shifted his path to the right. He's a right-handed player, to like 9 or 10 degrees to the right. I mean, that's excessively too far. So what do you think was happening? So low point moved further back. He started hitting everything, topping low thins, because now, I mean, he did a lot of stuff. So the greatest part I did with that is I fired that TrackMan report in the follow-up session I had with him to his coach and said, hey, this is what I saw. He's not hitting this particular club very well. I'm not telling that coach that 10 degrees is too far, but he knew it immediately and said, oh, okay, so as a human, we can overdo things. And so he overdid that one. And so at the end of the day, you can't fit perfectly to, you can't fit perfectly to someone's like air, because maybe that player wants to play to that, or maybe that player hits 2 degrees across, wants to play a fade, does not want to hook that ball, so we try to line up exactly what lie angle, what the shaft's doing in combination with that head, because it will droop and it'll deflect, and then the design of the head, but you try your best to do it. And I don't share too much technique-wise with players in their session with me, because honestly, they always ask, and I always try to tell them, hey, you're doing a lot of really good things here. Your coach might want to look at, like, maybe I can achieve peak height. That's a category that's tough sometimes, because no matter, I know what I would tell them to do is technique, but I don't say it, but sometimes I can't hit that perfect window. And no matter what I do, soften the shaft, lighten the shaft, add more loft on the club. Sometimes it's just not there because of the way they're doing it. And so that's why we try to connect with their coaches as well and share the data too, so that, it keeps everything as part of a team.
I like that. I really like the team approach too, and I think that's what we're seeing more and more of on tour. Is there's the swing coach, there's the club fitter, there's the fitness pro. There's a little bit of everything that goes into it. So it sounds like if somebody has that concern, if they're working with a coach or if they're working with a pro, just you fill that gap, which is awesome. Todd Lippert had 2 questions. One of them, Todd, I know I can answer for you. You wanted to know cost. I think that's on the TrueSpec website. The other one is probably on there as well, which is, are there any locations in Texas, which I don't know off the top of my head. Do you guys have a Texas location?
I don't think off the top of my head that we're in Texas yet.
Okay.
That doesn't ring a bell. I
Perfect.
didn't. I kind of
yeah, so go to TrueSpecGolf.com and it should be up there, right?
Yeah, there's a little map, and it shows, there's 19 or something, so you'll be able to see.
Awesome. What about from Heath Johnson, wants to know about picking the right grip size?
This is a really good one, because I had this come up the other day. So commonly, and I've done this my whole career, is I will have a client make a backswing to the top of their backswing in real time, but before they start to make their transition and move downward in their downswing, I'll tell them to hit freeze, and then I take their lower hand off. I want to see what their top hand is doing, and then I'll open it up and I'll see where they're setting that club at. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, think about this: if a player is putting it all the way up in the palm of their hands, it's going to appear or feel like that grip is way too small, and it's commonly that grip is in the wrong spot. Now, the greatest thing is we're doing grip size and choice at the very end of the fitting. So you're not talking about adjusting or moving their grip or even telling them that their grip isn't ideal, because you're already done hitting balls. And so, but you would suggest to them, hey, ideally the grip and club might fit at the base of the fingers and not all the way up in the palms, to where they don't have quite a very good grip on it. And so once you move it in the right ideal location, you can see the size of it, and in relation to the bottom 3 fingers, or the highest fingers on the club, then you can do that. Now, texture of grip, you know, parallel or more what's called modern taper, you know, like instead of a grip just tapering as it gets narrower down the shaft. Those kinds of things come up as far as rate of closure on the face, preference, feel, but color, texture, things like that, that's a personal choice. And we can explain that, how like duration, how efficient a grip can last, to the color. Some people want to line up. If the shaft has a little blue on it, they want a little blue on the grip. I mean, that's a choice. But size is definitely done by your top hand, and it's done where you're placing the club in your hand. And then it's also by feel. I know personally for me, I've gone from a standard 58 round to, playing in mid-size, and I've gone back and forth. I think now I've kind of settled on a certain size I like best. My grip, I've always checked, and it's really good. But so size is, we fit to size as an ideal, and we fit to the type of grip as far as, you know, tapering or not, to assist with closure rate of the face. But I think that hits the nail there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how it's done at the end, because you guys have all the specs. You know how much grips weigh. You know how much tape weighs if you want to build it up a little bit. And you can just do the math and say, here's the perfect club. We know what we need to do to build it the right way so that you can have that grip. You can play it the way you want without it changing performance, which is really cool.
And there's, on occasion, because of a size that I've spec'd out for somebody, and I know that grip has a certain gram weight, there's on occasion I've had to tell them, hey, it's going to make this head play this swing weight, and I don't know that would be ideal for you, you know. Mm-hmm. And we didn't test it, you know, because our grips, we use the Lambkin Sonar, the S Plus, in our whole matrix, so it's the same grip. And so at the end of the day, we don't know exactly yet, but you want to do it at the end, because especially when you look at size and how they're holding that grip, you know, and you don't want to give any suggestions like in the middle or early on, any time before that, because that player's it's gonna mess with them a little bit.
Awesome. These next two questions are similar. We kind of touched on them already a little bit, but just to summarize, from Peyton Gunkel, he wants to know the number one thing you look for when determining shaft stiffness. And David Bruce Anthony wants to know why a stiff shaft from one manufacturer is different than one from another. And like I said, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but if you want to just kind of wrap that up, and people can always go back and watch the full explanation, but what's the summary of those two?
I would say the number one thing with shaft stiffness and is how fast a player is moving that club, and then what is the ball doing, you know, dispersion wise and trajectory wise, because and I guess we could say curve, because a softer shaft is going to have, you know, you'd have to it's like slowing down a car, you know, you'd have, instead of going 40 miles an hour, you have to back it down to 27 miles an hour, and maybe it stays in its lane a little bit easier, you know. So when you're swinging very fast and the shaft isn't lining up frequency, okay, then you start to see some chaos usually. And then my job as a fitter is you look up and go, okay, he's over moving this ball right to left as a right-handed player. Let's get a little stiffer and try and straighten this out. Or he's not hitting it high enough, so let's get a little softer. Even though let's push the limit, he swings it at a pretty good rate, pretty good speed. I'm going to soften it a little just to get some more height, you know, but then it's going to have some deflection in it. So you have to you're going to teeter-totter on what is best. And by the end of the session, you're going to be able to go, the player's going to tell you, he's like, that's the one. This is clearly the best, because he's going to hit a half a dozen or 10 balls. You're going to circle back again. So in the queue, you're going to have a couple dozen shots in there that you know how that club performed. Now, how does shafts change, or why does one manufacturer think that they put stiff on it and it really doesn't fall kind of in that category, or why it comes down to the construction and how that shaft is built. Like graphite shafts, if if most of you know how graphite is built, and how many layers, how many times it's wrapped, the pattern of wrapping, and where is most of the weight in that shaft at. mid butt section or tip section, et cetera, the more times and more material, the more weight. And so in order to keep it lighter, they can't wrap it as much, you know, that's why you get like a 40-gram ladies graphite iron shaft or something. And, you know, you can't, sometimes on frequency it says NA because bending it like that and putting that much force on it could, you know, affect the shaft a little bit. So you got to be careful. But so ideally, the coolest part is, and you saw this in the studio at my location, every time you pull a drawer open, every single shaft has a frequency on it. Except there's maybe 2 or 3 in there that are NA because of the gram weight. But I already know how that shaft, so I look at if it says it's a 6X, but it's, you know, 260 CPMs at 45 inches, to me, that's a little bit softer, maybe, you know, and then you can get a 45 inch that's 281, you know, in the same manufacturer. It's not the same shaft, but the same manufacturer pulls this shaft and they're 16 to 18 CPMs off, you know, 20. I mean, it's not unheard of, but that's why if you're getting fit and you get fit into gram weight because of how it's launch conditions, frequency, because I try not to say flex because if it says regular, I just want to know what the frequency is, you know, and so like you said earlier today, which is a perfect analogy, is we figured out what your fingerprint was like, you know, and so when you do that, you can narrow it down. Because once we get to the end of head selection, and we even with you, we got it down to the last 2 or 3 heads, and we move around different shafts and frequencies and things like that. Then we chip away at it, and we really find out what the end result of shaft, the frequency, the head design, shape, etc. What's the combination? How is it going to perform? And let's see it. And so that's how. But you know, it's not to say that the manufacturers that they're putting out bad product because it says it's stiff, but it's a lower frequency. It doesn't. So stiff, regular, ladies, you know, X. We don't look at that too much. We want to know exactly how that frequency of shaft is performing.
Awesome. I'm going to go with, unless more live questions come in, I think this is going to be the last one here. And this is from Jackie Bird. And Jackie wants to know, and I know Jackie lives outside of Phoenix. She's been over to some of your facilities before. Yeah. She wants to know, as a competitive player, as somebody who plays all the time, how often should she be checking her equipment? Is it something where once she's fit once, she's good for a while? Does she have to keep going back? And what does that process look like? And what's a general guideline for those kind of tune-ups or check-ins?
I would say there's some factors that go into it. If you're a player that's practicing with an instructor and coach, and you make some changes and you're seeing a change. So I would say the measurement is what's your ball doing? You know, like if you haven't made any adjustments or you're not trying to do anything different, but you're starting to see some chaos in the ball flight, I would hop back in with your fitter or your instructor and just make sure like is something off here. Now, it's not often like that player I used earlier as an example, going from 4 or 5 degrees across to 9 or 10 to the right. Like that's a 15-degree deviation, you know, like that's a massive change. And we don't see that much. Players in general don't change their stuff too often as far as their technique. They can clean up some things, but through the impact area, it's not likely that a player is going to go from 2 or 3 upright to 4 flat. You know, like that's a big change. Now, always use your ball flight as the measurement. Are you not hitting it high enough? Because maybe that's a loft issue, you know. Maybe during the fitting you weren't leaning the shaft and you were adding some loft to it, and so we selected a head or we chose a specific loft that was a little stronger to keep the flight down. We don't know what combination, but I would say as a rule of thumb, depending on how much you practice and play, and then I would come back in, you know, every quarter, you know, every few months, you know, and if you don't play that often, do it once a year, twice a year or something, but I would check them, you know, don't just stay with the same club, you know. I mean, I've seen it before. A player comes in with like 15-year-old irons, you know, and then I see what he's doing to the golf club, and I see the lie of the golf club, and most likely over 15 years, he's made adjustments to make that iron work to achieve what he's trying to do with the ball. So he's adapted over time versus a player making ideal motion with a coach, you know, efficient, whatever they're trying to achieve, and then allowing TrueSpec and our master fitters to follow along, right along with them, and make sure that club's performing exactly the same way. Because what you don't want to do is have a coach or instructor try to get a player to do something, and then they film it, even in 3D, but the club's not synced up. So all of a sudden, no matter how good of coach or instructor that is, if sometimes it's not the player, sometimes it's the club. And so you have to, that's where the team component comes in.
I love that. So that being said, I think there's no more live questions coming in, and I'm going to post a link in the description for anybody that wants to watch the session that you and I did together, which I think was just, like I said, and why I wanted to have you on here, just absolutely blew me away. So if anybody wants to watch that and say, okay, now that we've heard about it, I want to see it, you guys can see the link to that. But I'm sure people are fired up, and now they want to play more golf. They want to come out and, oh man, sorry, I think I did something with, give me one, there it goes. It should go back. Sorry, I was clicking the wrong buttons. So people are fired up. They want to play better golf. They want to get a club fitting. They want to come see Jason over at Pronghorn. They want to go to a different TrueSpec. How do they get in touch with you? What does that process look like?
I would definitely hop on to TrueSpec Golf and to their website, and you can connect to each individual studio location. You can go to my email. It's jason.owens@truespecgolf.com. Or my mobile number's 971-404-9787. You can call me there. That's actually my phone. We don't have a landline in the building, so we just use my number. And then, but the website's awesome because it's super good. You can find locations super easy. You can call our customer service. They'll actually transfer you into somebody. I mean, it's really great. So that's the best way to do it.
Awesome. That's perfect. Well, Jason, I can't thank you enough for being here. That was amazing. And I know I continue to learn some things, even being in the industry for a very long time. I'm sure everybody else is learning a lot as well. So I appreciate you being here and spending your time with us.
Thanks for having me on this morning. And I look forward to helping anybody that wants to come out and see me.
Awesome, guys. Go see Jason. Thanks so much, Jason. We'll talk soon.
Bye.